The auctioneer's voice cut through the dusty Nevada air like a blade, and Clara Kellerman felt every eye in the crowded square turn toward her as she stood on the platform in Ely, her wrists bound loosely with rope that chafed against her skin. The sun beat down mercilessly on this September day in 1881, and she kept her chin high despite the humiliation burning through her chest, despite the fact that her father's debts had brought her to this moment, standing like livestock before a crowd of strangers who assessed her worth with calculating eyes. "We'll start the bidding at $200, the auctioneer announced, his voice booming across the square. "Young woman, healthy, can read and write, good for household work or whatever else a man might need." Clara's stomach turned at the implication, but she refused to let tears fall. Her father had died 3 months ago, leaving nothing but a mountain of debt and unpaid taxes on their small ranch outside town. The tax collector had come last week with the sheriff, and when she could not produce the money owed, they had given her a choice that was no choice at all: lose everything and be thrown out with nothing, or enter into an indenture contract to pay the debt. 7 years of servitude to whoever purchased her contract. 7 years of her life signed away because her father had been too proud to ask for help when the ranch started failing. "200, called a voice from the back, and Clara's heart sank as she recognized Silas Morton, a wealthy mine owner known for his cruelty to his workers and the way he went through housekeepers like other men went through whiskey. "250, came another bid, this one from a farmer Clara vaguely recognized from the general store. The auctioneer nodded, his gavel ready. "250, do I hear 300? Clara scanned the crowd desperately, looking for any familiar face that might show mercy, but most of the townspeople had turned away, unable or unwilling to meet her eyes. This was how things worked out here in the harsh Nevada territory, where the law favored those with money, and a woman alone had few options when fortune turned against her. 300, Silas called out, a triumphant grin spreading across his weathered face. The auctioneer raised his gavel. 300 once, 300 twice, $800. The voice rang out clear and strong, and every head in the square turned toward the speaker. Clara's gaze followed, landing on a tall figure standing at the edge of the crowd. He was a cowboy by the look of him, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that fell almost to his shoulders beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He wore dusty trail clothes and had a bedroll slung across his broad shoulders, as if he had just ridden into town. Something in his weathered face suggested he had seen more than his share of hardship, but his eyes, when they met hers across the distance, held a warmth that made her breath catch. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. "Did you say 800, stranger?" "I did." The cowboy stepped forward, moving through the crowd with an easy confidence. "And I want to see the full accounting of her father's debts before I pay. I want to know exactly what I'm settling." The tax collector, a thin man named Perkins who had been standing to the side, stepped forward with a ledger. "The ranch taxes come to $347, plus another $53 in penalties and interest. 400 total." The cowboy nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "So you were going to sell her into 7 years of servitude for $400 of debt?" Perkins shifted uncomfortably. "That's what the law allows. Indenture contracts are legal and binding. I am aware of what the law allows." The cowboy's voice was quiet but carried an edge of steel. "I am also aware that there are men in this crowd who would abuse such a contract, and I will not stand by and watch that happen." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch, counting out coins with steady hands. "Here is $800. I am purchasing her contract, paying double what you claim she owes." The auctioneer looked between the cowboy and the tax collector, clearly uncertain how to proceed. "That is highly irregular. Take the money or do not. But I will not stand here and debate while that woman suffers further humiliation." The cowboy's eyes remained fixed on Clara, and she found herself unable to look away. There was something in his gaze that made her feel seen for the first time since this nightmare began, not as property or a burden, but as a person worthy of dignity. Perkins snatched the money quickly, clearly eager to take the windfall before the stranger changed his mind. "Sold, then. The contract is yours." He produced a document from his coat and thrust it toward the cowboy, who took it without looking at it, still watching Clara. The auctioneer banged his gavel. "Contract sold to I did not catch your name, sir." "Yates Vance." The cowboy finally turned away from Clara to address the official. "And I want that recorded properly. Every dollar accounted for." Within minutes, the formalities were completed, and the crowd began to disperse, many casting curious glances back at Clara and her unexpected benefactor. Silas Morton left with a scowl, clearly displeased at being outbid. The sheriff untied Clara's wrists, and she rubbed at the raw skin, her mind racing with questions and fears about what would come next. Yates Vance approached the platform, and up close, Clara could see the lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun, the calluses on his hands that told of hard work, and the way he held himself with a quiet strength that made her feel simultaneously safe and terrified. He was perhaps 27 or 28, not much older than her own 22 years, but he carried himself like a man who had lived through more than most. "Can you walk?" His first words to her were gentle, concerned. "They did not hurt you?" Clara found her voice, though it came out shakier than she would have liked. "I can walk. They did not hurt me, not physically." The emotional wounds were another matter entirely, but those were not his concern. He nodded and held out his hand to help her down from the platform. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip as he steadied her descent. Once her feet touched solid ground, he released her hand and took a step back, as if aware that she might need space after such an ordeal. "I have a camp just outside town," he said. "I arrived this morning and was planning to move on tomorrow, but those plans have changed. We need to talk, you and I, about what happens next." Clara nodded, unsure what else to do. She had no belongings to collect, nothing left of her old life except the clothes on her back. Everything from the ranch had been seized to pay other debts. She followed Yates through the streets of Ely, aware of the stares and whispers that followed them, until they reached the edge of town, where a sturdy horse was tied near a small camp. Yates gestured toward a log near his fire pit. "Please sit. You must be exhausted." She sank onto the log gratefully, her legs shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed. Yates busied himself with building up the fire and setting a pot of coffee to boil, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to caring for himself on the trail. Clara watched him work, trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to understand why this stranger had paid so much to purchase her contract. Finally, when the coffee was ready and he had poured her a cup, Yates sat down across the fire from her and pulled the contract from his coat. He stared at it for a long moment, then without a word he tore it in half. Clara gasped, nearly dropping her coffee. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done the moment they handed it to me." He tore it again, then fed the pieces to the fire. They caught quickly, curling and blackening as the flames consumed them. "You are not property, Clara Kellerman. You are not a debt to be paid or a servant to be owned. You are a free woman, and you should never have been put in that position." She stared at him, unable to process what she was seeing. "But you paid $800. I did, and it was worth every penny to keep you out of Silas Morton's hands or anyone else who might have bought that contract to abuse you." He met her eyes across the fire, his expression serious. I have seen what men do to women they consider property. I grew up on a plantation in Missouri before the war, and I will not forget the horrors I witnessed there, the way people were treated as less than human, because of a piece of paper that said someone owned them. When I heard what was happening in that square, I could not walk away. Clara's hands trembled around her coffee cup. I do not understand. You are giving me my freedom, just like that. I am. He leaned back, studying her carefully. You owe me nothing, Clara. You are free to go wherever you wish, do whatever you choose. If you want to leave Ely, I can give you some money for traveling. If you want to stay, I can help you find honest work. The choice is entirely yours. It was too much. The relief, the confusion, the sudden overwhelming weight of freedom after believing she had lost it forever, all came crashing down on Clara at once. She set down her coffee cup with shaking hands and covered her face as tears finally came, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She heard Yates move, felt him crouch beside her, but he did not touch her. It is all right, he said softly. Let it out. You have earned the right to cry. Why? The word came out broken between sobs. Why would you do this for me? You do not even know me. Because it was the right thing to do. His voice held a quiet conviction that cut through her anguish. Because I have the means to help, and I could not live with myself if I walked away. Because every person deserves dignity and choice, regardless of their circumstances. He paused. And because I know what it feels like to be trapped by circumstances beyond your control, to feel like the world has abandoned you to a fate you do not deserve. Clara lowered her hands, looking at him through tear-blurred eyes. His face held such genuine compassion, such understanding that it made her chest ache in a different way. Who are you, Yates Vance? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Just a cowboy who has been drifting for too long, trying to find a place to call home. He stood and returned to his seat across the fire. I left Missouri during the war, fought for the Union because I believed slavery was an evil that needed to end. After the war, I could not go back to that plantation, to those memories, so I headed west. I have been working ranches and trail drives ever since, saving my money and looking for a place to settle down and start over. And you spent your savings on me. The guilt hit Clara hard. $800, that must have been. I still have enough, he interrupted gently. I have been saving for nearly 16 years. I am not destitute. And even if I were, I would make the same choice. Money can be earned again. A person's freedom and dignity, once stolen, are much harder to restore. They sat in silence for a while, the crackling fire and the distant sounds of Ely the only noise between them. Clara sipped her coffee, trying to calm her racing thoughts and figure out what to do next. She had no family left, no friends who could help her, no money, and no home. The freedom Yates had given her was precious, but it was also terrifying. Freedom meant choices, and she had no idea what choice to make. I have nowhere to go, she admitted finally, her voice small. No family, no money, nothing. The ranch is gone, sold to pay my father's other debts. Everything I owned was taken. Yates nodded slowly. Then you have time to figure out what you want. You are welcome to stay at my camp tonight. Tomorrow we can talk about options. There are ranches around here that might hire help, or you could travel to one of the larger towns where there are more opportunities. Why are you being so kind to me? Clara could not help asking again. It seemed impossible that such generosity could exist without some hidden motive, some expectation of repayment. He met her eyes steadily. Because kindness should not need a reason. Because I believe that people ought to help each other when they can. And because, he hesitated, then continued. Because when I saw you standing on that platform, holding your head high despite everything, refusing to let them break your spirit, I saw courage that deserves to be rewarded, not punished. Heat rose to Clara's cheeks at the compliment, and she looked down at her coffee. I did not feel courageous. I felt terrified. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite the fear. Yates stood and moved to his saddlebags. You should eat something. When did you last have a proper meal? Clara tried to remember. 2 days ago, I think. They kept me in a cell at the sheriff's office after they seized the ranch. They gave me bread and water, but not much else. His jaw tightened. That is shameful. These are supposed to be civilized people, not barbarians. He pulled out supplies and began preparing a simple meal of beans, bacon, and the last of his bread. As he cooked, he talked to her in that same gentle voice, asking about her life before her father's death, what she enjoyed doing, what her dreams had been. Clara found herself answering more readily than she expected, telling him about growing up on the ranch, about learning to read from her mother before she died when Clara was 12, about her dreams of someday seeing San Francisco, or even traveling back east to visit the places she had only read about in books. She told him about her father's slow descent into debt after her mother's death, how he had tried to keep the ranch going but could never quite manage it alone, how his pride had prevented him from accepting help until it was too late. Yates listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest, and when the food was ready, he served her a generous portion before taking a smaller one for himself. They ate as the sun set over the Nevada landscape, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that took Clara's breath away. For a moment, she could almost forget the horrors of the day and simply exist in this peaceful moment by the fire with this strange, kind cowboy who had saved her from a fate she did not want to contemplate. After they finished eating, Yates spread out his bedroll for her near the fire. You take this. I will keep watch tonight and sleep on my saddle blanket. I cannot take your bed, Clara protested. You have already done too much for me. I insist. You need proper rest after what you have been through. When she continued to hesitate, he added with a slight smile, Besides, I have spent more nights on the hard ground than I can count. One more will not hurt me. Reluctantly, Clara accepted, too exhausted to argue further. As she settled into the bedroll, Yates moved to sit with his back against a rock, his rifle across his lap, watching the darkness beyond their fire. Despite her exhaustion, Clara found sleep elusive at first, her mind replaying the day's events over and over. But eventually, lulled by the warmth of the fire and the quiet sound of Yates humming an old trail song under his breath, she drifted off into a sleep deeper than any she had known in months. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon frying, the sun already well up in the sky. Clara sat up quickly, disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was and why. Yates was crouched by the fire cooking breakfast, and he looked up when he heard her stirring. Good morning. I hope you slept well. I did, thank you. Clara pushed her hair back from her face, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. She had not had a proper bath in days, and her dress was dusty and wrinkled from her ordeal. What time is it? About 9. I figured you needed the rest. He handed her a cup of coffee. I have been thinking about your situation, and I have a proposal I would like you to consider. Clara's stomach tightened with apprehension, but she took the coffee and waited for him to continue. Yates settled back on his heels, choosing his words carefully. I came to Ely because I heard about some ranch land for sale about 15 miles north of here. The owner died without heirs, and the bank is looking to sell it cheap to anyone willing to work it. I was planning to look at it today. He paused. The thing is, running a ranch alone is nearly impossible. I was planning to hire help once I got established, but I have another idea now. What idea? Clara asked warily. I want to offer you a job. a real job with fair wages and a place to live. Come work on the ranch with me. Help me get it running properly, and I will pay you $25 a month plus room and board. You would have your own room in the ranch house, full independence, and you can leave anytime you want. No contract, no obligation. Just honest work for honest pay. Clara stared at him. $25 a month. That is more than most ranch hands make. You would be doing more than ranch hand work. Cooking, cleaning, helping with livestock, potentially learning to manage the books and accounts. It is a full partnership in making that ranch succeed. And more importantly, it is a safe place for you to land on your feet while you figure out what you want to do with your life. If you decide after a few months that you want to move on, I will give you a good reference and help you however I can. It was too generous, too good to be true, and yet Clara found herself wanting desperately to say yes. Why would you offer me this? You could hire anyone. Because I trust you. Yates met her eyes. I saw who you are yesterday on that platform. I saw strength and dignity and intelligence. Those are qualities I want in a partner, in someone I am working alongside. And honestly, he gave a self-deprecating shrug. I would rather work with someone I know has integrity than take my chances with a stranger who might rob me blind first chance they get. Clara found herself smiling despite her lingering uncertainty. You do know that I am a stranger who might rob you blind. I am willing to take that risk. There was warmth in his voice, a hint of humor that eased some of her tension. So what do you say, Clara Kellerman? Will you come look at this ranch with me and consider my offer? She should have been more cautious, should have asked more questions, should have demanded references and proof that he was who he claimed to be. But something in Clara's heart told her that Yates Vance was exactly what he appeared to be. A good man trying to do right in a world that often made that difficult. And the alternative was staying in Ely with no money and no prospects, hoping to find work that would likely pay a fraction of what he was offering. Yes, she said. I will come look at the ranch, and if it seems like something I can do, then yes, I will accept your offer. The smile that broke across Yates' face transformed him, making him look younger and more carefree. Excellent. Finish your breakfast and we will ride out. I hope you do not mind riding double on my horse until we can get you one of your own. An hour later, Clara found herself seated behind Yates on his large roan gelding, her arms wrapped around his waist as they rode north from Ely. She tried not to think about the impropriety of the situation, the way she could feel the warmth of his body through his shirt, the way her heart seemed to beat faster every time he turned his head to check that she was all right. This was merely practical, she told herself. They were business partners, nothing more. The land they traveled through was harsh but beautiful in its own way, all scrub brush and rocky outcroppings under an endless blue sky. Yates pointed out landmarks as they rode, telling her about the area's history, about the mining booms and busts that had shaped Ely, about the wildlife that managed to thrive in this unforgiving landscape. He was an easy conversationalist, and Clara found herself relaxing against him as they rode, enjoying the freedom of being out under the open sky after days of confinement. They reached the ranch by early afternoon, and Clara's breath caught as they crested a low hill and saw it spread out before them. It was not large, maybe 160 acres by her estimation, but it had a good-sized house, a barn that needed some repairs, and several smaller outbuildings. A creek ran through the property, its presence marked by a line of cottonwood trees, and in the distance, she could see what looked like good grazing land. "What do you think?" Yates asked as they dismounted. "It is beautiful." Clara walked forward, taking in the property with growing excitement. "The house needs work, and the barn definitely needs repairs, but the bones are good, and water access that is precious out here. My thoughts exactly. Yates tied his horse to a post and headed toward the house. Let us look inside. The house was dusty and had clearly been empty for several months, but it was solidly built with 2 bedrooms, a main room with a large fireplace, and a separate kitchen area. The previous owner had left behind some basic furniture, and while everything needed a thorough cleaning, Clara could see the potential. If I take the back bedroom, you could have the front one, Yates said, standing in the main room and gesturing. It is bigger and gets better light. We would share the common areas, obviously, but you would have your privacy and your own space. Clara walked through the house, her mind already planning how she would clean and organize everything, what curtains she would make for the windows, how she would arrange the kitchen to make it more efficient. She caught herself thinking in terms of we and our, and had to remind herself that this was Yates' ranch, not hers. She would just be an employee. But when she returned to the main room and saw him watching her with that same gentle expression he had worn by the campfire, something in her chest tightened with an emotion she could not quite name. He was giving her more than a job, more than just a place to land on her feet. He was giving her hope, a chance to rebuild her life with dignity and purpose, and he was asking nothing in return except honest work. I would love to work here, she said softly. If you are serious about the offer, then yes, I accept. I am completely serious. Yates extended his hand. Partners, then. We will build this ranch together and make it thrive. Clara shook his hand, feeling the now familiar warmth and strength of his grip. Partners, she agreed. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the property and making plans. Yates would need to go back to Ely to finalize the purchase with the bank, buy supplies, and arrange for some basic livestock to get started. Clara volunteered to stay at the ranch and begin cleaning the house, but Yates insisted she come back to town with him. It is not safe for you to be out here alone yet, he said firmly. Once we get the place set up, and I know you have what you need to protect yourself, then you can stay here while I make trips to town. But for now, we stick together. Clara wanted to argue that she could take care of herself, but the truth was that she felt safer with Yates nearby. So she agreed, and they made the ride back to Ely as the sun began to set, this time with Clara feeling like she had a purpose and a future again. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked from dawn to dusk, transforming the ranch from an abandoned property to a working home. Yates completed the purchase with surprising speed, producing the money and paperwork the bank required. They bought supplies in Ely, including food, tools, cleaning materials, and basic household goods. Yates insisted on buying Clara several new dresses and proper work clothes, along with sturdy boots and a coat for the coming winter. You cannot work in the dress you were wearing, he said when she protested the expense. Consider it part of your wages. They also bought a small herd of cattle to start with, just 20 head that they could manage between the 2 of them, and a gentle mare that Yates insisted Clara learn to ride properly. You need independence, he told her as he taught her to sit a horse correctly, to guide it with her knees and reins. You need to know you can go anywhere you want, anytime you want. Clara found herself falling into an easy rhythm with Yates. They worked side by side during the day, repairing fences and buildings, caring for the cattle, improving the property. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk about everything and nothing. Yates told her about his life before the war, about growing up on that Missouri plantation, and how seeing slavery up close had shaped his beliefs. He told her about the battles he had fought, the friends he had lost, the long years of drifting afterward as he tried to find his place in a changed world. Clara found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, about her mother's death, and how lost she had felt afterward, about her complicated relationship with her father who had loved her, but could never quite figure out how to show it after losing his wife. She told Yates about the loneliness of growing up isolated on a failing ranch, about her hunger for knowledge and experience beyond the narrow confines of her life. "You should travel," Yates said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. "Once you save up enough money, you should go see San Francisco and all those other places you talked about." "Maybe," Clara said, though the thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Yates, held surprisingly little appeal now. She had only been here 2 weeks, but already this place felt more like home than anywhere had since her mother died. She caught herself watching Yates more often than she should, noticing the way the setting sun caught in his dark hair, the gentle strength in his hands as he worked, the sound of his laugh when she said something that amused him. She told herself it was just gratitude, just appreciation for his kindness, but deep down, she knew it was becoming something more, and sometimes she caught him watching her too, with an expression in his eyes that made her heart race and her breath catch. But he never said anything, never crossed any lines, always maintained a perfect respectful distance that was both comforting and frustrating. A month after Clara came to the ranch, they rode into Ely together for supplies and ran into Silas Morton outside the general store. The mine owner's expression soured when he saw them, and he stepped into their path deliberately. "Well, if it is not the bleeding heart cowboy and his charity case," Silas drawled, his words slightly slurred. He had clearly been drinking. "Tell me, Vance, how is that working out for you? Has she robbed you blind yet, or is she paying you back in other ways?" The implication in his tone was unmistakable, and Clara felt her face burn with humiliation and anger. But before she could respond, Yates stepped forward, his entire demeanor changing. The gentle man she had come to know disappeared, replaced by someone harder, someone dangerous. "I am going to give you one chance to apologize to Miss Kellerman," Yates said quietly, his voice deadly calm. "One chance to walk away from this with your dignity intact." Silas laughed, a harsh sound. "Or what? You will fight me over some woman who is going to be sold like livestock. She is not worth it, Vance. She is worth more than you will ever understand." Yates' hand moved to rest on his hip, near the gun he wore. "And if you ever insult her again, if you ever so much as look at her with disrespect, I will make sure you regret it. Do I make myself clear?" Something in Yates' eyes must have convinced Silas that he was serious, because the mine owner took a step back, his bravado faltering. "There is no need for threats. I was just making conversation." "Then let this be the end of that conversation." Yates held his gaze until Silas turned and walked away, muttering under his breath. Clara released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did." Yates turned to her and the hardness faded from his expression, replaced by concern. "Are you all right? I am sorry you had to hear that." "I am fine. I have heard worse." But the truth was that having Yates defend her so fiercely had shaken something loose inside her, some last wall she had been keeping up against the feelings growing in her heart. "Thank you, though, for standing up for me." "Always," he said simply, and the way he said it made Clara believe he meant it literally. He would always stand up for her, always protect her, always treat her with the respect and dignity she deserved. They finished their shopping in silence, both lost in thought, and on the ride home, Clara found herself leaning against Yates' back more than was strictly necessary, taking comfort in his solid presence. She was falling in love with him, she realized. Slowly, inevitably, she was falling in love with this kind, strong, gentle man who had saved her and asked nothing in return. The question was, did he feel the same way? And even if he did, would it be wise to act on those feelings? Their partnership was working well, and romance could complicate everything, could ruin what they had built together. But as they reached the ranch and Yates helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering on her waist just a moment longer than necessary, as his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch, Clara began to think that maybe the risk would be worth it. The autumn deepened, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints that winter was coming. Clara and Yates worked harder than ever to prepare the ranch, stockpiling supplies, reinforcing buildings against the weather to come, and making sure the cattle would have adequate shelter and feed. They fell into an even closer partnership, often working in comfortable silence, communicating with looks and small gestures more than words. One evening in late October, Clara was cooking dinner while Yates worked on repairing a bridle by lamplight. The domesticity of the moment struck her suddenly, how much this felt like a real home, like a real partnership. She wanted to say something, to tell him how much these months had meant to her, but fear held her tongue. "Clara," Yates' voice broke through her thoughts. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She turned from the stove to face him. He set down the bridle, his expression serious. "Are you happy here? I mean truly happy, not just grateful to have a place to stay. Because if you are not, if you want something different, I want you to feel free to tell me." The question took her by surprise. "Why would you think I am not happy? I just want to make sure." He stood and moved closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "When I made this offer, I told you that you were free to leave any time. I meant that. But I also want you to know that if you choose to stay, if you want to stay, then I would like to discuss making this a more permanent arrangement." Clara's heart began to race. "What kind of arrangement?" Yates took a deep breath, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked genuinely nervous. "I was thinking we could become real partners, equal partners in the ranch. I could have the property deed redrawn to include your name, give you an actual stake in what we are building here. You have worked as hard as I have to make this place successful, and you deserve to own part of it." It was a generous offer, incredibly generous, but Clara found herself oddly disappointed. She had hoped, that maybe he was going to say something else, something more personal. "That is very kind of you. It is not kindness, it is fairness." Yates ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she had rarely seen from him. "Clara, I need you to understand something. These past months, working with you, living alongside you, getting to know you, it has been the best time of my life. You make me laugh, you challenge me to be better. You have turned this house into a home. And I know I said that you owe me nothing, that you are free to make your own choices, but I have to be honest with you about what I want." "What do you want?" Clara asked, barely breathing. He closed the distance between them, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I want you to stay, not as an employee, not even as just a business partner. I want you to stay because you want to be here, because you feel the same way about me that I feel about you." "And how do you feel about me?" The words came out as a whisper. "I am in love with you." Yates said it simply, directly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you on that platform, refusing to let them break your spirit. And every day since then, I have fallen deeper. The way you laugh at my terrible jokes, the way you sing while you cook, the way you are not afraid to tell me when you think I am wrong about something. I love all of it. I love you." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "I love you too. I have been afraid to say it, afraid that I was just confusing gratitude with something deeper, but it is not gratitude. It is love, real, genuine love." The smile that broke across Yates' face was like sunshine. "Really, really." Clara reached up to touch his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. "You saved me, Yates. not just from that auction, but from giving up on life entirely. You showed me what it means to be valued, to be respected, to be treated as an equal. How could I not fall in love with you?" He covered her hand with his own, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. "I need you to know that nothing has to change if you are not ready. We can take as much time as you need. I am not going anywhere. I do not want to take time." Clara moved closer until barely any space remained between them. "I have spent my whole life being careful, being cautious, waiting for the right moment. But what I have learned is that life is too short and too uncertain to waste time on fear. I know what I want, Yates. I want you. I want this life we are building together. I want a future where we are not just partners in business, but partners in everything. Clara." He breathed her name like a prayer, then bent his head to kiss her. It was gentle at first, tender and questioning, but when Clara wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed closer, the kiss deepened into something more passionate, more certain. It felt like coming home, like finding a piece of herself she had not known was missing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I am sure about this. I am sure about you. Marry me, Clara. Be my wife, my partner, my everything." "Yes." Clara laughed through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes. Nothing would make me happier." They kissed again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. This was a promise, a commitment, a declaration that they had chosen each other freely and completely. When they finally separated, Yates held her close, and Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beating of his heart. "We should probably check on dinner," she said eventually, noticing the smell of something starting to burn. Yates laughed and released her reluctantly. "Probably. Though I do not care if we eat burned stew for the rest of our lives as long as I get to do it with you." They saved dinner before it was completely ruined and spent the rest of the evening making plans for their future. They would get married as soon as possible, Yates said. He wanted to make Clara his wife in the eyes of the law as well as in their hearts. They would go to Ely tomorrow and speak to the minister. "And after we are married," Yates continued, his arm around Clara's shoulders as they sat by the fire, "I want to officially make you an equal owner of the ranch. I will have the papers drawn up properly. Everything I have is yours." "Everything you have is ours," Clara corrected. "That is what marriage means, is it not? Sharing everything, the good and the bad." "The very good," Yates murmured, pulling her closer and kissing her temple. "I cannot wait to spend the rest of my life with you." They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the church in Ely. Clara wore one of the new dresses Yates had bought her, a deep blue that brought out her eyes, and Yates wore his best clothes, looking handsome and nervous and completely devoted. The minister performed the ceremony with only a few townspeople as witnesses, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed Clara with such tenderness that several of the watching women sighed. After the ceremony, they stopped at the land office where Yates made good on his promise to add Clara's name to the ranch deed. The clerk raised his eyebrows at the unusual request, but completed the paperwork, and Clara walked out of that office as a full legal owner of the property, an equal partner in every sense of the word. They celebrated with a nice dinner at the hotel restaurant, then rode back to their ranch as the sun set, Clara sitting in front of Yates this time, his arms wrapped around her as he guided the horse home. Their home, she thought with wonder. Not his or hers, but theirs. That night, as they lay together in what was now their shared bedroom, Clara traced the line of Yates' jaw with her finger. "I never thought I could be this happy. When I was standing on that auction platform, I thought my life was over. But instead, it was just beginning. We are both beginning again," Yates said, capturing her hand and bringing it to his lips. Two people who had lost their way, finding each other and finding home. You are my home, Clara whispered. Wherever you are, that is where I belong. And you are mine, he replied, then showed her with kisses and gentle touches just how much she meant to him. The winter that followed was cold but beautiful, with snow covering the landscape and turning the ranch into something from a fairy tale. Clara and Yates worked together to keep the cattle safe and the ranch running, and in the evenings, they would sit by the fire, planning for the spring and the future they were building together. Clara was astonished by how natural married life felt with Yates, how easy it was to share space and decisions and dreams with him. He treated her as a true equal, asking her opinion on everything from which cattle to buy in the spring to how to arrange the furniture. When they disagreed, which was not often, they talked through it until they found a compromise that satisfied them both. In January, Clara realized she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. They had not talked much about children, and she was not sure if he was ready for that step. But the joy that lit up his entire face answered that question immediately. Truly, we are going to have a baby, truly. Clara found herself smiling at his excitement. Probably sometime in late summer, if I have calculated correctly. Yates swept her up in his arms, spinning her around before setting her down carefully, as if she were suddenly made of glass. This is the best news. We need to make sure you are taking care of yourself, not working too hard. Maybe we should hire someone to help around the ranch so you can rest more. Clara laughed at his sudden overprotectiveness. I am pregnant, not ill. I can still work. Though I will accept help, especially as I get further along. We should be able to afford a ranch hand now. They hired a young man named Thomas in February, a hard worker who was grateful for the steady employment and fair wages. With his help, Yates was able to take more of the physical labor off Clara's shoulders as her pregnancy progressed, though she continued to manage the household and help with lighter tasks. As spring arrived and Clara's belly swelled with their child, Yates became even more attentive and devoted, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was comfortable, if there was anything he could do. Clara found it endearing, though she had to occasionally remind him that she was not helpless. I know you are not helpless, Yates said one evening, his hand resting gently on her rounded stomach. But you are carrying our child, the most precious thing in the world to me besides you. Let me fuss over you. It makes me happy. How could she argue with that? So Clara let him fuss, let him wait on her hand and foot, let him talk to their unborn baby every night about all the things they would do together, the life they would build. She fell even more in love with him during those months, watching him prepare for fatherhood with the same careful attention he brought to everything else. Their son was born on a hot August evening in 1882, after a long and difficult labor that left Yates pale and shaken, even as he held his new son for the first time. They named him William, after Yates' father who had died when Yates was young, and from the moment William drew his first breath, both parents were utterly besotted. Clara watched Yates with their son during those first weeks and months, saw the gentle way he held the baby, the soft voice he used when talking to him, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. This was the man who had saved her from a terrible fate, who had given her freedom and then given her his heart. This was the man she would spend the rest of her life loving. The years that followed were full and rich, with hard work and good times in equal measure. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing from that initial small herd to something substantial. They added more land when neighboring property became available, built a larger barn, improved the house. William grew into a bright, curious boy who adored both his parents and loved life on the ranch. When William was 3, Clara gave birth to twin girls, Helen and Rose, who kept their parents busy and exhausted and deliriously happy. Yates proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful and devoted to his children. He taught William to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, read stories to the girls every night, and made sure all 3 children knew they were loved beyond measure. Clara watched her family grow and thrive with a sense of contentment she had never imagined possible. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, and she and Yates sat together on the porch watching the sunset, she would think back to that terrible day in the town square and marvel at how completely her life had changed. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked one such evening, his arm around her shoulders. "About the day we met," Clara admitted. "About how close I came to a completely different life, a terrible life. About how lucky I am that you were there." "I am the lucky one," Yates said, kissing the top of her head. "You could have chosen to leave after I freed you. You could have gone anywhere, done anything. But you chose me. You chose this life, this ranch, this partnership. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." "It was not a hard choice," Clara said, tilting her head to look up at him. "You showed me what love really is, Yates. Not ownership or control, but respect and partnership and genuine caring. You gave me my freedom, and I chose to give it right back to you, because being with you does not feel like giving up freedom. It feels like finally being free to be fully myself." He kissed her then, long and sweet, and when they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I love you, Clara Vance. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," she replied. "Thank you for paying double and giving me the freedom to choose. Thank you for being the kind of man worth choosing." By 1890, 8 years after William's birth, the ranch had become one of the most successful in the area. Yates and Clara had built not just a home but a legacy, something they could pass on to their children. They were respected in Ely, known for their fair business dealings and the way they treated their employees well. Several of the ranch hands had been with them for years, loyal because loyalty had been earned through decent treatment and honest wages. Clara sometimes took the children into town for supplies, and she would see other women watching her with something like envy or admiration. She knew what they saw. A woman who was clearly loved and valued, who stood as an equal beside her husband, who had turned her life around from that dark moment 8 years ago. Sometimes young women would approach her, asking for advice, and Clara would tell them that the most important thing was to never accept less than they deserved, to hold out for someone who would treat them with respect and dignity. She never mentioned where she had come from, the auction platform and the humiliation. Most people in town had forgotten by now, or at least had the decency not to bring it up. But Clara never forgot. She never forgot what Yates had done for her, the gift he had given her of choice and freedom and love. As the decade turned and the 19th century drew toward its close, Clara looked at her life with deep satisfaction. She was 31 years old, mother to 3 beautiful children, wife to a man who still looked at her like she hung the moon, co-owner of a thriving ranch. She had traveled to San Francisco with Yates for their 5th anniversary, seen the ocean for the first time, visited museums and theaters, and all the places she had dreamed about as a lonely girl on a failing ranch. But as wonderful as that trip had been, returning home to their ranch had felt even better. Because home was not a place, Clara had learned. Home was the people you loved and who loved you back. Home was waking up next to Yates every morning and falling asleep in his arms every night. Home was the sound of her children's laughter and the smell of bread baking and the sight of cattle grazing on land that bore both her name and her husband's. One evening in spring of 1891, as they celebrated their 9th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner after the children were in bed, Yates took Clara's hand across the table. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small wrapped package. Clara opened it to find a beautiful silver locket. Inside was a tiny photograph, one they had taken on their trip to San Francisco, showing the two of them standing close together, both smiling at the camera. On the other side was an engraving. "You are free to choose me, and I choose you every day." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes as she traced the words with her finger. "It is perfect. Help me put it on." Yates fastened the locket around her neck, then kissed the spot where it rested against her collarbone. "9 years ago, I saw a woman who refused to be broken, and I knew I had to help her. I did not expect to fall in love. I did not expect to find my soulmate. But I did, and every single day since then has been a gift, even the hard days." Clara teased, thinking of the inevitable struggles they had faced over the years. Harsh winters, cattle losses, a bad fever that had struck William when he was 5 and terrified them both until it broke. "Especially the hard days," Yates said seriously. "Because those showed me that we can get through anything as long as we face it together. You are the strongest person I know, Clara. You took the freedom I offered and built an entire life with it. You took my heart and made it whole. You took an empty house and turned it into a home. I am in awe of you." "We did all that together," Clara corrected, standing and moving around the table to sit in his lap, her arms around his neck. "Every bit of it we built together. That is what I cherish most, Yates, not the ranch or the success, but the partnership. The way we work together, support each other, love each other. You are not just my husband. You are my best friend, my partner, my home." They kissed, and it still felt as electric as that first kiss in the kitchen 9 years ago still made Clara's heart race and her breath catch. She thought about how many women never got to experience this kind of love, this kind of equality and respect in a marriage. She thought about how easily she could have ended up with someone like Silas Morton, someone who would have treated her as property, as less than human. But instead, she had ended up with Yates, who had seen her at her lowest moment and chosen to lift her up rather than take advantage, who had given her freedom knowing she might use it to leave him, who had trusted her to make her own choices and then been overjoyed when she chose him. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, his hand stroking her back. "About choices," Clara said. "About how one moment, one decision can change everything. About how grateful I am that you made the choice to help me and I made the choice to stay." "Best choice I ever made," Yates murmured against her hair. "Paying double for your freedom was the best investment of my life." Clara pulled back to look at him seriously. "You know it was never about the money, right? It was about the intention behind it. You could have paid the minimum and I would have been just as grateful. But you paid double because you wanted to make a point, because you were standing up against an unjust system, because you were protecting me even before you knew me." "I saw something in you that day," Yates said. "A fire, a strength that even those circumstances could not put out. I wanted to make sure that fire had the chance to burn bright. And it has, Clara. You burn so bright you light up my whole world." They stayed like that for a long while, wrapped in each other's arms before finally heading to bed. As Clara lay beside her husband in the darkness, listening to his steady breathing, she thought about the story she would someday tell their children when they were old enough to understand. She would tell them about the day their father saved their mother, about how he gave her freedom and then earned her love. She would tell them that real love is not about ownership or control, but about choice and respect and partnership. And she would tell them to hold out for that kind of love, to never settle for less than someone who would treat them as an equal, who would value them for who they are rather than what they can provide. She would teach her daughters that they were not property, that they had the right to make their own choices and determine their own paths. She would teach her son to treat women with the same respect and dignity that his father showed his mother every single day. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. William grew into a capable young man who shared his father's integrity and his mother's intelligence. He took to ranching naturally, learning everything Yates could teach him about managing land and livestock. The twins, Helen and Rose, were very different from each other but equally beloved. Helen was adventurous and bold, always climbing trees and trying to keep up with William. Rose was quieter, more thoughtful, with a love of books and learning that reminded Clara of herself as a young girl. In 1895, Clara gave birth to another son, James, who came as a wonderful surprise when she was 36. Yates was thrilled, and the older children adored their baby brother. Clara looked at her family, at the life they had built together, and felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible during those dark days before Yates came into her life. The ranch continued to prosper, and Yates and Clara became known throughout the region not just for their business success, but for their strong marriage and the way they raised their children to be respectful and hardworking. They employed several families on the ranch now, and Clara made sure that all the employees were treated fairly, that the women were paid the same as the men for equal work, that everyone had decent housing and working conditions. "You are changing things," Yates told her one day, watching as she helped the wife of one of their ranch hands set up a small school for the children on the property. "You are making this place better than just a successful ranch. You are making it a good community." "We are making it a good community," Clara corrected, as she always did. "I could not do any of this without your support, without you backing me up on every decision." But Yates shook his head. "You give me too much credit. These are your ideas, your values. I just have the good sense to recognize when my wife is right, which is most of the time." Clara laughed and kissed him quickly before returning to her work. Even after 14 years of marriage, moments like these still made her heart flutter, still made her grateful beyond words for the life they shared. As the century turned and the year 1900 arrived, Clara was 41 and Yates was 44. They celebrated the new century with their children and their extended ranch family, looking back at the previous 2 decades with satisfaction and forward to the future with hope. William was 18 now, a young man ready to start thinking about his own future. He had no interest in leaving the ranch, though, instead wanting to work alongside his parents to continue building what they had started. The twins were 12, growing fast and starting to develop their own distinct personalities and interests. James was 5, all energy and curiosity and joy. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked Yates one night as they lay in bed. "Taking a chance on me that day in Ely. Your life would have been simpler if you had just bought that ranch and hired help the traditional way." Yates turned to look at her, his expression serious. "How can you even ask that?" "Clara, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children, the life we built together, that is everything. Simple would have been empty. Alone would have been lonely. I thank God every day that I was in Ely that day, that I had the chance to help you, that you chose to stay with me." "I would choose you again," Clara said softly. "Every single time I would choose you. And I would pay double again," Yates replied with a smile. "Whatever it took to ensure your freedom, whatever it took to give you a choice." They made love that night with the tenderness and passion of a couple who had chosen each other freely and continued to choose each other every single day. Afterward, as Clara drifted off to sleep in Yates' arms, She thought about how far they had come from that day in the town square. She had been sold to pay taxes, treated like property, stripped of her dignity and choices. And Yates had stepped in, paid double what was required, and said the words that changed her life. "You're free to choose me." She had chosen him, not because she had to, not because she owed him anything, but because he was a man worth choosing. A man of integrity and kindness, of strength and gentleness. A man who had shown her what real love looked like, what true partnership meant. And in return, she had given him her heart, her loyalty, her love, freely and completely. The years that followed continued to bring their share of both joy and sorrow, as life always does. They lost Thomas, their first hired hand, to a riding accident in 1903 and mourned him as part of their family. They celebrated William's marriage in 1905 to a wonderful young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and welcomed their first grandchild, a little girl named Clara after her grandmother, in 1906. The twins grew into remarkable young women, Helen eventually choosing to become a teacher, and Rose following her love of literature to become a writer. James showed an early talent with horses that suggested he would carry on the ranching tradition alongside William. Through it all, through every triumph and tragedy, every change and challenge, Yates and Clara stood together. They grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces showing the lines of years spent working under the Nevada sun, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experiences and the history they had built together. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1907, their children threw them a large celebration at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from across the region. As Clara stood beside Yates, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and the community they had built, she felt overwhelmed by gratitude. During the celebration, William stood up to give a toast. "My father once told me the story of how he and my mother met," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "He told me about seeing her standing on an auction platform, about how he knew immediately that what was happening was wrong, that no person should ever be sold like property to pay a debt. He told me about paying double what was required, not because he had to, but because he wanted to make a statement, wanted to ensure my mother had true freedom to make her own choice." William paused, his eyes moving between his parents, "And my mother chose him. She chose this life, this ranch, this partnership. And because of that choice, because of the love and respect and equality they built their marriage on, all of us exist. All of this exists." He gestured to the thriving ranch around them. "So I propose a toast to my parents who showed us all what real love looks like, what true partnership means, to 25 years of marriage and to many more years to come." "To many more years," the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Clara felt tears streaming down her face as Yates pulled her close. "He is right," she whispered. "Look at everything that came from that one moment, that one choice." "All good things," Yates murmured back. "Every good thing in my life came from the moment I met you." They danced together that night under the stars, moving slowly to music played by a small band of local musicians. Clara rested her head against Yates' chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the strength of his arms around her, and thought about how this moment was perfect. Not because everything in their lives had been easy, but because they had faced it all together, as partners and equals and deeply in love. As the years continued to pass, Clara watched with satisfaction as her children built their own lives and families. William and Sarah had 3 children and were running the ranch with increasing skill and success. Helen married a teacher from Ely and opened a school in town that became known for its innovative approach to education. Rose published her first novel in 1912, a story about life in the West that earned critical acclaim. James married and took over managing the horse breeding program on the ranch, turning it into a profitable venture in its own right. Yates and Clara gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, though they remained involved and interested in everything that happened. They spent more time traveling, finally taking that trip back east that Clara had dreamed about as a girl, seeing the ocean on both coasts, visiting museums and cities and places they had only read about. But they always came home to the ranch, to the place they had built together, the land that bore both their names and their legacy. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the Nevada landscape, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in the silence as well as the conversation. In the spring of 1920, as they approached their 38th wedding anniversary, Clara woke one morning to find Yates still asleep beside her, which was unusual. He was always an early riser, always up before dawn to check on things, even though William and James handled most of the ranch work now. "Yates," she touched his shoulder gently. "Are you feeling all right?" He opened his eyes and smiled at her, that same warm smile that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "Just enjoying lying here next to you. Do we have to get up?" Clara laughed. "We are not so old yet that we can spend all day in bed. Though I suppose at 61 and 65, we have earned the right to be a little lazy sometimes." They got up and went about their day, but Clara noticed that Yates seemed more tired than usual, moving a little slower. She tried not to worry, telling herself he was just getting older, that they both were, and that was normal. But over the next few weeks, she could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. Finally, she convinced him to see the doctor in Ely. The news was not good. Yates' heart was weak, the doctor explained, and he would need to take things easy, avoid stress and heavy work. With proper care and rest, he could have several more good years, but he needed to slow down significantly. Yates took the news with characteristic calm, but Clara could see the frustration in his eyes. He had always been so active, so involved in everything. The idea of having to step back to watch from the sidelines clearly bothered him. "We will figure this out," Clara told him firmly on the ride home. "You will rest like the doctor said, and I will be right there with you. We have spent 38 years as partners. I am not about to stop now." "I do not want to be a burden," Yates said quietly. Clara turned to look at him sharply. "Do not you dare say that. Do not you dare think that. You gave me my life back, Yates. You gave me love and partnership and a family and a home. Taking care of you now is not a burden, it is a privilege. It is what partners do." He reached over and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I love you, Clara Vance." "And I love you," she replied. "We will get through this together just like we have gotten through everything else." And they did. Yates slowed down as the doctor ordered, spending more time resting, letting William and James handle the ranch entirely now. But he and Clara still had their evenings together on the porch, still had their conversations and laughter and deep abiding love. Clara made sure he took his medicine, made sure he did not overdo it, but she also made sure he still felt vital and important, still felt involved in the life of the ranch and the family. They celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1922 with a quiet dinner, just the two of them. Their children had offered to throw another big celebration, but both Yates and Clara preferred this, just the two of them, reflecting on 4 decades of marriage. 40 years, Yates mused, his hand covering Clara's on the table. 40 years since I convinced you to take a chance on a cowboy with a dream. You did not have to convince me of anything, Clara corrected. You just had to show me who you were, and the choice was easy. Best 40 years of my life, he said softly. Every day with you has been a gift, Clara. Even the hard days, she asked, echoing a conversation they had had many times over the years. Especially the hard days, he replied, as he always did. Because those were the days that showed me how strong we are together. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire in the fireplace, holding hands across the table. Finally, Yates spoke again. If something happens to me, if this heart of mine gives out sooner than we hope, I want you to know that I have no regrets. I lived the life I wanted to live with the woman I love, and I built something good that will last beyond me. Nothing is going to happen to you, Clara said firmly, though fear clutched at her heart. You are going to be here for many more years yet. I hope so, Yates said. But if I am not, promise me you will keep living, keep moving forward. Do not stop just because I am gone. Yates, promise me, Clara. His grip on her hand tightened. Promise me you will live the full, free life I wanted for you from the beginning. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. I promise, but only because I know I will not have to keep that promise for a very long time yet. He smiled and stood, moving around the table to pull her into his arms. They swayed together slowly, dancing without music like they had done so many times over the years. Clara pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady beating of his heart, and prayed that it would keep beating for many years to come. Yates lived for 3 more years, dying peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1925 at the age of 69. Clara woke that morning to find him gone, lying peacefully beside her with a slight smile on his face, and though her heart shattered, she took comfort in knowing he had gone quietly, without pain, still lying beside the woman he loved. The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over the region to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. Clara stood at the graveside, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and said goodbye to the man who had saved her, who had loved her, who had been her partner and friend and the love of her life for 43 years. After the funeral, as family and friends gathered at the ranch, William approached Clara. "Are you going to be all right, Ma?" Clara looked around at everything Yates had built, everything they had built together. Their children, strong and successful. Their grandchildren, growing and thriving. The ranch, prosperous and well managed. The community, better for having known him. "I will be all right," she said, meaning it. "Your father gave me the gift of knowing how to stand on my own feet, how to be strong and independent, and he gave me all of you and this legacy we built together. I miss him already, more than words can express, but I will be all right." And she was. Clara lived for another 15 years, remaining active and involved in the ranch and her family's lives until the very end. She wrote down the story of how she and Yates met, how he saved her and gave her freedom, how she chose him and they built a life together. She wanted her grandchildren and great-grandchildren to know the story, to understand the values their family was built on: dignity, respect, equality, and love freely chosen. Clara Vance died in 1940 at the age of 81, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her last words were, "Tell him I am coming," and she died with a smile on her face, ready to be reunited with the man who had been her partner, her friend, her love, her everything. She was buried beside Yates on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, and on her headstone, below her name and dates, were the words he had given her so many years ago, the words that had changed her life. "You were free to choose me, and I chose you." And though Clara was gone, the legacy she and Yates built lived on through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to thrive, run on principles of fairness and respect. The story of how they met became family legend, passed down through generations as a reminder that true love is built on freedom, on choice, on treating each other as equals. It was a story about a woman sold to pay taxes, about a cowboy who paid double and gave her the freedom to choose, about two people who built a life and a love that lasted beyond death and echoed through the generations. It was a story that began with the worst of circumstances and ended with the best of outcomes, proof that kindness and integrity and love freely given can transform lives and create legacies that last forever. And so the story of Clara and Yates Vance became more than just their story. It became a testament to the power of choice, the importance of dignity, and the enduring nature of true love. It became a reminder that in the darkest moments, there can still be light, that even when someone has lost everything, they can still find hope if someone is willing to reach out a hand and offer not charity, but respect and freedom and the chance to choose their own path. Their story was one of heartache transformed into happiness, of despair transformed into hope, of bondage transformed into freedom. But most of all, it was a story of love, simple and complex, challenging and rewarding, the kind of love that makes life worth living and leaves the world better than it found it. The kind of love that begins with the words, "You're free to choose me," and ends only when the last person who remembers their story forgets, which, given the power and beauty of what they built together, would be never.